Football was not born in boardrooms, it was born in factories, in shipyards, in mining towns. It was played by working people, watched by working communities and passed down through generations as a shared cultural ritual. It was built by industrial communities as a release from labour. Football was never just a game, it was a weekly habitual that affirmed belonging. Clubs were formed by workers, funded by communities and sustained by loyalty rather than profit. Football was something you belonged to, not something you purchased. Today, that relationship has fundamentally changed. Football is now a global entertainment industry worth billions of pounds. Clubs are brands, fans are just consumers, and ownership has become increasingly concentrated by billionaires and the hands of the global elite. Yet for the match-going supporters, football is still personal and the emotional connection remains deeply local, because for those, it is memory, it is identity, it is belonging. This documentary explores how the growing divide between ownership and supporters reflects deeper ideological tensions around class, power, economics and cultural identity in modern British football. And that's the uncomfortable question, whether the people who sustain the game still have any meaningful power within it. In this documentary, I will go over 3 different football clubs with vastly different experiences with ownership and discuss the differing models of ownership and class relations produce different forms of culture.
But to first understand the modern football club, we must first understand how power operates. Karl Marx argued that in capitalist societies, power lies within those who control the means of production. Those who own production extract profit, while those who work generate value without ownership. To put this into football terms, ownership controls the club, the players, the stadium, and increasingly the media narrative itself. Fans, meanwhile, provide something equally valuable but unpaid: atmosphere, loyalty, identity, culture. From a Marxist perspective, this creates structural imbalance. Owners extract economic value while supporters perform a form of cultural labour, unpaid, emotional and essential, yet they remain structurally powerless, generating meaning without ownership. This imbalance creates a familiar class dynamic. Those who create the value do not control it. From a Marxist angle, Kennedy and Kennedy argued that professional football in neoliberal times becomes a site where capitalist relations of production shape every aspect of the game. Commercialisation intensifies, clubs chase revenue and supporters are repositioned as consumers whose loyalty is monetised rather than centred as community stakeholders. Under this regime, football is neoliberalised, meaning clubs act like profit-seeking firms, while fans are commodified within brand strategies and global consumer circuits. Sociologist Pierre Bourdieu helps us understand why this conflict feels so deeply personal. Fans possess embodied cultural capital, and owners possess economic capital. When economic capital overrides cultural capital, conflict is inevitable. It is at this point when football stops being a shared cultural institution and becomes a contested site of class struggle. Neoliberalism is a political economic theory shaping contemporary global society. Emerging prominently in the late 20th century, it advocates for the expansion of market logic into all areas of life, prioritising private property, deregulation and free trade. At its core, neoliberalism is defined by David Harvey as a theory of political economic practices proposing that human well-being can best be advanced by the maximisation of entrepreneurial freedoms within an institutional framework characterised by private property rights, individual liberty, unencumbered markets and free trade. This definition highlights 2 key points: the belief that markets are the most efficient mechanism for organising society, and that individual freedom is best realised through economic participation. The role of the state is not eliminated but reconfigured to create and maintain markets rather than to regulate them for social welfare. However, critics argue that this framing masks deeper inequalities, and Harvey contends that neoliberalism has succeeded in restoring class power, suggesting that rather than creating widespread prosperity, it has redistributed wealth and power upwards to the economic elite. The transformation of British football since the late 20th century reflects these neoliberal ideas, particularly the formation of the Premier League in 1992. This marked a decisive shift towards market-driven governance, prioritising broadcast revenues and global expansion, showing football's moral economy has shifted towards a profit and competition instead of previous community-based values. This concentration of power is further explored by Colin Crouch, who argues that as a result, high levels of profit and earnings can remain unchallenged. In the first instance, these inequalities concern earnings among different firms, but they gradually affect overall levels of inequality in society through differences in earnings and, more importantly, wealth. This observation directly applies to the Premier League, as a small number of wealthy clubs dominate financially and competitively, despite the rhetoric of an open competition. It shows that the structure increasingly favours elite teams and neoliberalism's tendency to continuous inequality, while maintaining an illusion of a free market. From a sociological perspective, Richard Guillonotti highlights how neoliberalism reshapes fan culture, as he argues fans and local communities have campaigned against the commodification of sports, such as how supporters are reclassified as consumers by club marketing people, how some club owners have sought to maximise profits from sports involvement. He indicates that the neoliberal market expansion is closely tied to the globalisation of football, and that supporters are increasingly redefined as consumers through forms of economic participation, like merchandise, media consumption and matchday attendance. This reflects the shift in the social relationship between clubs and fans and aligns with neoliberal ideals of a market-based identity. Peter Kennedy describes the impact of neoliberalism on supporters in the most accurate way, as he argues that supporters are deemed to be in a prison of capitalist exploitation through mechanisms as diverse as having to pay exorbitant ticket prices, acting as walking billboards for expensively priced replica kits, and the manner in which football as a spectacle offers a false escape route from the alienation encountered in the mundane drudgery of everyday working life. The evidence in rising ticket prices, merchandise and broadcasting in modern British football illustrate that clubs prioritise international audiences and revenue streams, characterising neoliberal politics into today's football. One of the most striking examples of neoliberal ideals in football is the attempted European Super League in 2021. On the 8th of April 2021, it was announced that 12 of Europe's leading professional football clubs had formally agreed to form and partake in a new Super League. The competition sought to strongly rival, if not replace, the existing Champions League. This proposal sought out to guarantee participation for select elite clubs, prioritising financial stability over the comparative merit, which in turn would see the inequality gap in football extend further. The Super League initiative would have enforced a structure where wealth and opportunities are concentrated among a small elite at the expense of others, and so as imagined there was immediate condemnation from supporters, politicians, former players and the media that argued the introduction of a closed league structure and the resultant diminution in the importance of sporting integrity, coupled with the perceived threat to national domestic leagues and their inherent rivalries, was seen to undermine the social identity of supporters and the cultural importance of the game. This backlash demonstrated the resistance to this model, highlighting the ongoing tension between neoliberal commercialisation and football's cultural roots. Neoliberalism has generated unprecedented wealth and global reach, but it has also produced sincere inequalities and undermined traditional forms of participation. The theory shows how this can be applied to the modernisation that has reshaped football by financialisation, commodification and elite power, therefore reflecting broader contradictions of neoliberalism itself as a system that promises freedom and opportunity, yet repeatedly delivers a consolidation of power and exclusion for those that do not fit the mould of a global elite. Culture is something that is persistently made through practices, representations and meanings. Cultural output theory understands culture not as a static body of traditions, but as an active process of production, circulation and interpretation. Using the era of the Premier League, we can analyse football as it operates as a social institution. Highly regarded theorist in this field, Raymond Williams, famously argued that culture is ordinary in every society and in every mind. This statement challenges elitist understandings of culture and positions everyday practices as a legitimate cultural production, meaning attending matches or participating in fan rituals can be forms of cultural output synonymous in this theory. He also argues on the makings of a society. Every human society has its own shape, its own purposes, its own meanings. Every human society expresses these in institutions and in arts and learning. The making of a society is the finding of common meanings and directions, and its growth is an active debate and amendment under the pressures of experience, contact and discovery. This meaning of culture can be applied in the same way to describe the processes as to how culturally attached football fans are to their clubs, and why it's so culturally significant to them. This culture is described best as a whole way of life. This emphasises that cultural outputs are embedded in normal societal experiences, but in a football sense, it shows that the game is not merely just entertainment, but part of the everyday cultural fabric of British society. Subsequent to this, Stuart Hall suggests an understanding on how cultural meanings are produced and interpreted through language, stating that the relationship between things, concepts and signs lies at the heart of the production of the meaning in language. Language here refers to the theoretical elements, as Hall lists sounds, words, notes, gestures, expressions, clothes are part of our natural and material world, but their importance for language is not what they are, but what they do. These are examples of a broad selection of outputs in where meaning is produced through language games. In football, we can apply these language games and their range of outputs into media coverage, commentary, chants and football clubs themselves, as they can be interpreted as not just sporting organisations, but as a cultural symbol where its meanings are constructed through representation. Furthermore, Hall's encoding-decoding model is particularly relevant here, as he describes communication as a circuit where messages are encoded by producers and decoded by audiences. In football terms, the supporters are not simply consuming football from the producer, but they subsequently interpret and adapt the meaning through those cultural outputs, like chanting or through banners and tifos. All of these examples represent forms of cultural production that may resist or reinterpret official club narratives. Because culture is not just about what is produced, but it's also about how it's understood. Narratives such as footballing rivalries are central to the emotional appeal of football, and those rivalry narratives demonstrate how football's cultural outputs function as systems to generate meaning.
For some clubs, the consequences of ownership decisions are devastating. For Derby County, what started as a tale of local investment and ambition quickly unravelled into protest and uncertainty, and at the centre, its fans found themselves in an agonising crisis that they did not create. Yet they were the ones forced to suffer. The Rams offer a painful example of how ownership decisions impacted their match-going supporters, leaving them questioning the very existence of their club.
When local businessman Mel Morris began his involvement with Derby County in 2014, many supporters welcomed the move, as he was a lifelong Derby fan and successful entrepreneur involved with the Candy Crush saga. He secured full ownership in 2015 and Derby started to spend heavily on players, breaking the club's transfer record 4 times in 3 years, which almost led to success, with multiple championship playoff runs. As well as this, Morris maintained the club's youth academy plan, as its facilities was granted into Category 1 status in the summer of 2014, meaning it was on par with multiple big Premier League clubs. He also stated that my goal over the next 5 years is that at least 50% of our first team will have academy players in it. However, beneath the early optimism, Morris's tenure at Derby stemmed from financial mismanagement and attempts to circumvent EFL financial regulations, and faced scrutiny from the EFL regarding accounting practices related to the amortisation of player contracts and the sale of club assets. One majorly controversial decision involved the sale of the club's stadium, Pride Park, to a company owned by Morris. While this move was technically legal, it was widely criticised as a method of artificially improving the club's financial position. By the 2021-2022 season, Derby faced mounting debts and cash flow problems, with the club reportedly losing between £1.3 and £1.5 million per month. During this time, Morris attempted to sell the club to several prospective buyers. However, multiple takeover deals collapsed, included reported negotiations from Abu Dhabi investors, Spanish businessman Eric Alonso, and most notably American entrepreneur Chris Kirchner, who visited the stadium multiple times and held official club interviews. 2 years later, he was sentenced and convicted of fraud. Systemic tensions between club identity and capital emerged, and in 2021, Derby were charged with breaching 3 regulations: failure to provide accounts, defaulted on payments to HM Revenue and Customs, and breaking financial fair play rules. The EFL took action and placed Derby under a transfer embargo, and to further punish the fans, Derby County entered administration after years of financial mismanagement, and were handed a 12-point deduction for entering administration, with a later additional 9 points by the EFL for historic accounting irregularities, specifically the sale of Pride Park and profit sustainability rule breaches. These deductions effectively guaranteed relegation from the Championship and pushed the club towards a crisis that threatened its very existence. While Derby's financial collapse and entry into administration in 2021 is widely framed in economic terms, it also exposed the conflicts between elite ownership and historically rooted fan base. The club's supporters did not remain passive. In fact, they protested against ownership, the EFL, and broader governance of the game. These actions can be understood through a major theory of social class by Antonio Gramsci called cultural hegemony. Gramsci's theory of cultural hegemony explains how ruling groups maintain dominance not simply through coercion, but through the shaping of cultural norms. The basic premise of the theory of hegemony is one which few would disagree, that man is not ruled by force alone, but also by ideas. The foundation of a ruling class is equivalent to the creation of a Weltanschauung. Marx had likewise observed that the ruling ideas of each age have ever been the ideas of its ruling class. This concept is highly relevant to football governance, as ownership structures in modern British football is often accepted as natural, even if it is in the hands of the global and economic elites. Derby's ownership under Mel Morris operated in this hegemonic framework through the way that the club was run using financial means such as heavy investment and risk-taking manoeuvres in attempts to secure Premier League promotion. The practices are largely accepted within the wider football industry, in that financial ambition is framed as necessary for success. Gramsci's theory suggests that this acceptance reflects hegemonic power, so that supporters are encouraged to consent to systems that may ultimately undermine them. However, the dominant ideology can be challenged. The consequences of Morris's decisions, like the points deductions, administration, and the threat to club survival, undermined common sense, and that financial risk leads to success. Therefore, the fans protested against the owner and the EFL, rejecting the dominant ideology as football as a financial enterprise. These protests can be understood as counter-hegemonic. Demonstrations outside Pride Park were a vocal criticism of ownership that represented a challenge to the hegemonic structure of football governance. Derby fans then moved from passive consent to active resistance, exposing the limitation of hegemonic control, allowing supporters to articulate a different understanding of what the club should represent.
The ownership decisions made far from the terraces left the club on the brink of collapse, and the supporters, who had no control over the spending or governance, were left to carry the consequences. There was uncertainty over the future of the entire club, a club with a deeply rooted history and culture were weeks away from becoming completely extinct. Supporters lose league status, community pride and long-term security, while owners often escape with limited consequences. When ownership prioritises financial speculation over the community responsibility, it is the working class supporters who absorb the damage. This is not simply mismanagement, it is a class issue that highlights how ownership structures mirror broader class inequality, where those with power are shielded from the outcomes of their decisions. The financial collapse of Derby County exposed the brutal reality of the fragile position supporters have within the modern game, that when ownership fails, fans pay the price. What happens when ownership succeeds? Inequality in football is not limited to just failure, it also exists within success. Manchester City represent the opposite end of the ownership spectrum: billionaire investment, global branding and sustained success. While success delivers pride, it also reshapes the class relationship between clubs and supporter. Ticket prices increase, locals' voices are diluted, and global audiences are prioritised over traditional match-going fans. However, City were not always this way.
For most of its history, Manchester City was a club shaped by its surroundings. East Manchester was industrial, proud, and deeply working class. For generations, the club represented the identity of a community, and with all the years spent in the shadow of Manchester United, City was still a well-supported club, but had limited spending power and global identity to the rest of the Premier League. Everything changed, however, in 2008 when Abu Dhabi investors purchased the club and Manchester City became one of the richest footballing institutions in the world almost overnight. Money was flowing into East Manchester on a scale football had rarely seen before. Controlled by Sheikh Mansour, this acquisition marked a dramatic shift in the club's economic position. In the summer of 2008, City signed Brazilian star Robinho from Real Madrid for around £32.5 million, which broke the British transfer record at the time, symbolising a clear shift in Manchester City's ambitions. Between 2008 to 2011, City invested hundreds of millions of pounds in to bring signings like Vincent Kompany, Carlos Tevez, David Silva, Yaya Toure and Sergio Aguero. These players became the core of the club's first successful era in the modern game, alongside Italian manager Roberto Mancini, who was appointed in 2009 and led the club to win the FA Cup in 2011, their first major trophy for 35 years. But the defining moment against QPR to secure the title on goal difference ahead of bitter rivals Manchester United on the final game of the season. Another significant aspect of Manchester City's ownership concerns the relationship between football and geopolitics through the lens of soft power. Soft power refers to the ability of states to enhance their international reputation and influence through cultural and economic engagement rather than direct political force. As referred to by Joseph S. Nye Jr., it is when one country gets another country to want what it wants, in contrast with the hard or command power of ordering others to do what it wants. Through the investment of Manchester City, Abu Dhabi has gained substantial global visibility within the club's success in domestic and European competitions, associating the emirate with sporting excellence and modernity. Therefore, football becomes a platform through which political actors can enhance international legitimacy and global prestige. This phenomenon reflects the broader restructuring of sport in the modern age, that football clubs become vehicles through political and economic elites to pursue their interests, highlighting the integration of state capital into football club ownership within global networks of power and influence. Derby County, by contrast, operates largely outside these global dynamics, within more of a national economic framework. This illustrates how not all clubs benefit from soft power and globalisation. This emphasises the unique position that a club like Manchester City has in football and the economic advantages that they possess off the pitch. Football has evolved beyond a locally embedded pastime into a highly commercialised global industry, which has led to the formation of an environment in which clubs not only operate as sporting institutions, but also as transnational entertainment brands. The takeover of Manchester City by Sheikh Mansour illustrates this shift clearly. Within a few years, Manchester City transitioned from a mid-table Premier League side to one of the wealthiest clubs in world football through massive investments, player recruitment and global marketing, all combining to transform the club's identity and competitive status. This transformation reflects football's integration into global capitalism as it functions as a global entertainment brand supported by international capital. Globalisation has increasingly detached clubs from these local roots. As Kennedy and Kennedy describe, in short, football is a much sought after business partner for corporate capital. It is fair to say that football has drifted far from its original moorings as the people's game, owned and controlled by the global elites, more for social capital purposes than to turn a profit. This means that globalisation has become embedded within multinational networks of capital and media, converting clubs into global cultural commodities. Under this transformation, Abu Dhabi investment into the club has been characterised not only by spending money on players, but also by the construction of an extensive commercial ecosystem in the City Football Group. This expanded the Manchester City brand into a global network of clubs across multiple continents, including teams in the United States in New York City FC, Australia with Melbourne FC, and Spain through Girona, alongside many others. These acquisitions allowed the organisation to maximise commercial opportunities and global influence. Referring back to hegemony, at Manchester City, hegemony operates more effectively because the narrative that wealthy owner is beneficial becomes a reality, even when it contributes to broader inequalities. Here, hegemony is maintained through material and symbolic rewards that align their supporters' interests with those of ownership.
The story of Manchester City is not simply about trophies, records, or even football itself. It is about transformation and how a club once rooted in the working class districts of Manchester became a symbol of football's transformation into the 21st century as part of a broader shift towards globalisation within the sport, increasingly operating within economic strategies shaped by global branding and geopolitics. Manchester City's transformation itself highlights that the sport can still remain a cultural force for supporters, reminding us that beneath the spectacle of modern football lies something far older and far more human, forcing a larger question. As football continues to expand into a global industry of immense wealth and power, can it still remain the people's game? Or has the beautiful game entered a new era, where the pitch is no longer a field to entertain the masses, but an auction for the global elite's interests? In 2005, English football was shaken not by a last-minute goal or a title race, but by an act of collective refusal when supporters of Manchester United, a club synonymous with global success, turned their backs on the institution that they had followed for generations. It was protest, it was grief, it was anger. And from that emotional rupture emerged FC United of Manchester, a club formed not in pursuit of glory, but in defence of something far more fragile, the soul of the game.
FC United of Manchester is widely regarded to have been set up in protest to Malcolm Glazer's takeover of Manchester United, but not the sole reason. As the official club's website says, the material theft of a Manchester institution forcibly taken from the people of Manchester was the tip of a pyramid of destruction, with changing kick-off times for the benefit of television. Soulless all-seater stadia full of new supporters intend to sit back and watch rather than partake in the occasion. Heavy-handed stewarding and ridiculously priced tickets propping it all up. For many supporters, the takeover epitomised a shift in the club that no longer felt like it belonged to its community. By 2005, a faction of supporters, many linked to the independent Manchester United Supporters Association and headed by Andy Walsh, resurrected the last resort idea from the successful repulsion of Rupert Murdoch in 1998. Within days, large-scale meetings were organised in Manchester with hundreds of supporters attending initial discussions, and a vote was held which saw that a clear majority supported the idea of the formation of a new club. A core group of volunteers who importantly were ordinary supporters, not investors or businessmen, formed to get their club started and so divided responsibilities into legal setup, finance and fundraising, league applications, and branding and identity, etc. The club formally set up as an industrial and provident society, and this type of structure ensured that it was community owned and made it illegal for a private takeover. Therefore, every member would have one vote regardless of how much money contributed. Because there were no wealthy owners, all of the funding had to be generated directly from the fans through membership fees, early merchandise and any donations. Luckily, thousands had contributed, which quickly built enough to launch the club, and FC United of Manchester was born. A sustainable, non-profit club for the long term, owned and democratically run by its members on a one-member, one-vote basis, focusing on making admission prices as affordable as possible, striving to be as accessible to all. Within a fortnight, FC United had gone from an idea to a functioning team and played its first ever game at Lee on July the 16th, 2005, in front of an official crowd of 2,552. Soon enough, the club secured a ground share with Bury at Gig Lane and had been granted into the North West Counties Football League, and in fairy tale-like circumstances, the club lifted the title in their debut season in April, which saw over 6,023 people in attendance. The story of FC United isn't one of just another team entering the football pyramid. It is one of refusal to accept that football has to be controlled from those above, but a belief that it can still belong to the fans. The takeover of Manchester United by Malcolm Glazer was more than just a transfer of ownership. For many of those supporters, it fractured a relationship that was once a shared institution. Glazer's takeover embodied the growing conception that supporters are recast as consumers, and for the case of FC United, this transformation was not just economic, it was deeply emotional. Supporting a club is rarely a rational act. It is identity, it is ritual, it is a collective experience, and so when that connection is disrupted, it creates a crisis. The formation of FC United represents a powerful example of collective identity theory in practice, as the club represents not just a football team, but a social movement grounded in shared values. Collective identity is a concept in the study of social movements. Rather than being fixed or a natural bond, it is understood as something actively created through interaction, shared meaning, and emotional investment. As Alberto Malucci famously defines it, collective identity is an interactive and shared definition produced by a number of individuals concerning the orientations of their action and the field of opportunities and constraints in which such action is to take place. This definition highlights two key ideas: that identity is constructed through relationships and that it exists to guide collective action. This idea that individuals recognise that they share certain orientations makes them decide to act together, which perfectly links to the founding of FC United of Manchester, because their common orientations are Manchester United, and their hatred over the Glazer takeover eventually led to the forming of their own collective action. Emerging from the disillusionment from the corporate ownership of Manchester United and Glazer's takeover, FC United represents a practical example of participatory democracy and how it can be applied to sport. Participatory democracy is a model of governance centred on the direct involvement of individuals in decision-making processes that affect their lives, and so rather than relying solely on elected representatives, it emphasises active and continuous participation. FC United exemplifies these principles through its organisational structure, as it operates on a one-member, one-vote system. It ensures that all members have equal say in key decisions. Carol Pateman argues, in the participatory theory, participation refers to equal participation in the making of decisions, and political equality refers to equality of power in determining the outcomes of a decision. This goal of participatory democracy aligns with the model of FC United, as the supporters are not passive consumers. They are active participants in shaping the club's decisions. As said by the Common Parvin, the theory is also promoted for its ability to allow a greater degree of popular control over the actions of public officials and representatives, essentially meaning it increases legitimacy and accountability for individuals when shaping decisions, and that those decisions carry greater authority. This is particularly significant in the context of modern football, where many supporters feel alienated by commercialisation. FC United offers an alternative model in which legitimacy is derived through the collective will of its members, rather than financial power. The club's community focus reinforces this democratic ethos as it maintains affordable access and engages with local initiatives. However, despite its strengths, participatory democracy is not without its challenges. Critics argue that large-scale participation can be difficult to sustain, particularly in complex organisations, as ensuring all equal involvement amongst all members can be challenging. Using Derby County, participatory democracy theory exposes a limitation. Despite intense emotional investment, Derby supporters have very limited formal influence over ownership decisions. Many supporters groups exist. Their role consists mainly as advisory and voicing their concerns on opinions at fan forums events held by the club. Similarly, this is the case with Manchester City, as the club is heavily corporatised, meaning the ownership and decision making is concentrated at the hands of the City Football Group executives and associated stakeholders. Again, they have a number of supporter groups like Manchester City Official Supporters Group, City Matters and the 1894 Group. However, these mainly just provide fans globally, enabling members to watch matches, travel to games and create fan displays, meaning they do not equate to real democratic control. Linking back, FC United represent an extremely rare example of sustained counter-hegemonic practices. The club's very existence challenges the idea that football must be controlled by the elite. However, its marginal status reflects the resilience of the hegemonic system, which continued to dominate the broader football landscape. When referencing globalisation, soft power and political economy, FC United of Manchester notably resist these theories as the club maintains a local focus, prioritising its community over global expansion. While this does align with their values and ideological stance, it also limits the club's influence within a globalised system, limiting its reach and financial growth. This reinforces the structural dominance of globalised football.
FC United of Manchester stands as a testament to the power of people coming together to reclaim football for its supporters. This is more than a football club, it is living proof of what it means to have a voice. Here, identity is not handed down by owners or shaped by commercial interests, it is formed in protest, sustained in ritual through the collective identity that transcends sport. Furthermore, what transforms this shared passion into real power is participation. The one member, one vote system embodies the principles of participatory democracy so that supporters don't just watch the game, they make it. This club was built by fans, for the fans, because of a shared commitment to a vision bigger than any individual. FC United shines as a rare example of what football can be when it is returned to the people. So who really owns the game? Is it the billionaires in boardrooms using clubs as toys for their enjoyment? Is it the governing bodies reshaping the sport to a market-driven industry? Or is it still the supporters, the ones who sing, who travel, who pass it down through generations, the ones who feel every victory and every loss? The answer is not simple. At Derby County, we saw how quickly a club can be brought to the brink of extinction by decisions made far from the stands, exposing a system where power is the norm, but their consequences are shielded. At Manchester City, we saw how success can mask inequality, using global capital to elevate a club to unimaginable heights, while quietly reshaping its identity. And at FC United of Manchester, we saw a resistance, a refusal to accept that football must belong to the global elites, and a reminder that another model is possible. These are not just stories, they are reflections of a wider world where wealth dictates power, where cultural institutions are absorbed into global markets. Football, once a working class ritual rooted in place and belonging, now exists at an intersection of culture and capital. But perhaps the most powerful thing this story reveals is not who owns football, but who refuses to let it go. Because despite everything, the money, the politics, the transformation, it is the supporters who continue to show up. They are the ones who continue to sing, to support, to care, and that is where football still belongs. Not in ownership documents or balance sheets, but in the people who give it meaning. Because without them, there is no atmosphere, no identity, no culture, no game.